Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM. Welcome to the Center for Educational Media at Middle Tennessee State University's College of Education. This is the SPED Collaborative, and we are about to have our next session. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Misty Birch Pritchett. She is an instructional coach at Red Bank High School in Hamilton County. And so she was nominated by people in the SPED Collaborative to present. And her topic today is accommodations on the fly. So Dr. Birchett, so happy you're here today, and please continue your introduction. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Birch. A lot of people at my high school just call me by my last name, Birch. So it's kind of interesting to hear my whole formal name out loud like that. So here are some credentials I have. I'm an instructional coach. I've been in that role for a couple years. I have been a special education teacher for the majority of my career. I've got, this December will actually be 20 years for me. And then I have a master's in special education, and then I have my doctorate in educational leadership. When I was coming up with this presentation and thinking about, this is something that is close to my heart. And so I'm like, how can I tie this into what teachers need? And so the next two slides are going to be directly related to the teacher evaluation system. I kept it kind of broad, but it's talking about your differentiated instruction and materials. Here's the evaluation indicator. Delivery of instruction, we're looking specifically at differentiation, differentiating through the lesson, the knows and when and how to scaffold. Flexible groupings within your classroom, and then appropriate times to use those groupings. So another question I want to answer is why accommodations on the fly? My husband's a fly fisherman, so when I started doing this presentation, I was like, this is what it is. It's accommodations on the fly sometimes, because you're not always able to plan ahead in a classroom. You're not always able to go to those PDs and go to those PLCs and all the other planning meetings with your fellow teachers, especially if you're a special education teacher. So these are things you can do on the fly, but these are also things that a general education teacher can do. Okay, so I took my ideas and I put them into 4 categories. So you've got actions and verbal, and then we have paper, pencil, and technology. So with actions within the classroom, we talk about proximity. We hear that a lot from our administration, proximity, proximity. Proximity is mostly when you're targeting like a behavior, somebody is talking when they shouldn't be. It could be to get someone's attention. It's very different from walking the room. When you're walking the room, that's when you're checking in to see if kids are getting what you're teaching. Are they actually learning? So very similar ideas, but very different ways to use them. Another strategy I would use is ask 3 and then me. And it could be ask 2. I'll just like 3 because it rhymes. So ask 3 and then me. So your students in the classroom, you have set this up where they have a question. Did they ask a friend? Did they ask a neighbor? And then they can come and ask you. It helps the transitioning from in and out of their seat. And then let's talk about purposeful breaks. So at the high school level, some of my teachers that I'm working with right now as an instructional coach, we had some conversation about breaks. We have 80-minute blocks, and that's a really long time to be sitting in your seat focusing on, your AP history or your chemistry. So they do purposeful breaks. So it's not like, okay, in the middle of the class, we're gonna stop and we're gonna take a break. But it's when they naturally come to an end of an assignment and then they take a break. The next bullet point, walk in their shoes, sit in their seats. So we all know about classroom arrangements, right? Setting up your classroom. And so one thing that's very important is to look at the setup of your classroom to make sure every student can be involved in the lesson. So, for example, it's okay if I sit down, right? Yeah? Okay. So let's say this student, the way the table's set up, they're facing this way. And the presenter, the teacher's here. What's going to happen with the student? They're going to turn, they're going to be distracted. So by sitting in a student's seat, you get to see what they see. Also, when you sit in a student's seat, think about that student and what they're dealing with that day. And it's a really humbling experience to actually sit and do that. I've done that in several classrooms for several students. And I think about things like, how did they get to school that day? Was it on the noisy bus? So when they got to me that morning, my goodness, they are so overloaded. So did the student come in knowing that, oh my gosh, we might have a sub today? All this anticipation. And so when you're in your classroom, and whether it's inclusion, resource, whatever it may be, and you think about where the student is sitting and thinking about what they've been through, it helps you better be able to serve that student. Let's talk about verbal. So let's talk about our prep work and mini conferences. So mini conferences. So you're thinking about your classroom and you're thinking about all the students in your classroom, and you need to talk to them about their grades, or you need to talk to them about their behavior plans or IEP goals or whatever it may be. Do a little prep work, and that might not be but just a second to pull up their grades on your screen and close out your other tabs. And then pull them to the side, not necessarily at their desk, but at your desk or out in the hallway, and have that conversation with them. So I see that you're missing this assignment in your chemistry class. Let's talk about that. That small little thing lets the student know that you're caring about them and that you prepared for them. Questioning techniques. So when you're in your lesson and you know you have a student that's not quite understanding the material, you have a student that's a little bit struggling with the concept that you're teaching, you're going to ask them clarifying questions, not to that student, but to maybe a student sitting beside them. Make sure that when you're asking that question, it's actually what you want an answer to. So you're leading up to that. So if you're reading a story and you want to focus in on a character, maybe the student that's struggling, you know that they can answer the character question, but maybe not answering what's going on. So planning your questions out as you're in the moment is important. The power of the Post-it note. This is something that I love to do, even as an instructional coach for my teachers now. So when I'm in a teacher's room and I see that they're doing something really amazing, I leave a little Post-it note that says, hey, what you just did was amazing. And teachers save those. I have a dear, dear friend that I call him my supervisor, but he's not really my supervisor. And he came in my classroom and he gave me some great feedback. And I wrote him a little Post-it note just telling him thank you for being here. At the end of the school year, this my supervisor showed me he had kept that Post-it note all year. For on those rough days, he looked back at that Post-it note and was like, okay, I'm doing this for the right reason. Same with your students. If you see they're just really rocking out an assignment, some kids don't like that. verbal praise out loud. They want a little quiet encouragement. So writing on a Post-it note, "You're doing amazing," or "I'm so proud of you." The power of that Post-it note, that's an accommodation right there that's quiet and just very powerful. Also, for curbing behaviors. If you see a student in and out of their seat, if you see a student that just won't stop talking to their neighbor, walk over, put the Post-it note on their desk, say, "Hey, every time you talk to your neighbor, or every time you get out of your seat, whatever your target behavior is, I'm gonna put a mark on this. You're not in trouble. I just wanna see how many times you're doing this." One of two things will happen. The kid will want to mark the marks themselves, or they're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I'm doing that a lot." And that'll curb that behavior. And that's something you can do quietly to not bring attention to it to the rest of the class. The next bullet point I found happens a lot in high school, not necessarily as much in elementary school. Who are you truly calling on? So I'm giving a lecture, and I'll say, "Okay, so what is the capital of Florida?" What's going to happen in that moment? Everybody's going to call out. And there's going to be a student that calls out the right answer, and there's going to be a couple students who don't call out the right answer, and I say, "Good job," and I move on. What was the right answer? I really noticed this when I was in a Spanish class, because I don't know Spanish, very small. And the teacher asked for the Spanish version of a word, and all the kids yelled out something different. She heard the right word, and she's like, "Great, yes, let's move on." And I'm like, whoa, I don't know what the word is. And in that moment, I was like, wow, who are you truly calling on? Who are we truly highlighting here? So making sure that when you're posing those questions, you do it in a way that the person, the student, knows that you're calling on them, and that is the right answer. Okay, I'm going to go back. There we go. So let's say you're in that moment and you do that where you say, "What's the answer?" And the whole class calls out. And you're like, "Wow, I heard a lot of different responses." Turn to your neighbor. Tell your neighbor your answer. And at that moment is when you can walk the room and see who's saying the right answer. And it doesn't take but a second to do it. And then you can refocus the students. For the holiday season, so many teachers love to give kids crossword puzzles or fill in the blank. And it's a fun activity. And usually there's some sort of points involved. Like you can have 10 extra points on your test, or you can substitute this for one of the assignments. And so it's supposed to be this fun activity. But what if you have a student who has dyslexia and you give them a crossword puzzle? That's not very fun. When I was teaching elementary, was when I thought about this, and I was like, this is not great. We need to have some accommodations for this. So when you're planning those fun activities, and you're planning for like the kids to do some sort of holiday thing, let's give them some choices. So instead of just having a crossword puzzle, let's think about other things that they could do. Maybe they want to do a coloring sheet where they're going to color in, the correct answers for certain things. Or maybe we have a fill in the blank. Or maybe it's simply that they get to turn that paper over on the back, the crossword puzzle, and they get to write about what's their favorite part of their holiday. So when you plan out these fun activities, have a couple of activities that are different choices that still relate to what you're trying to do. If it's a fun holiday activity, it's kind of more open. If you're trying to hit a certain standard, just focus in on what that standard is and have some choices for those kids so those fun activities don't become dreaded activities. So, graphic organizers. When we're talking about paper pencil in the classroom, let me tell you guys a story. So I was an inclusion teacher for a biology class. And I'm in there, and the teacher had colored pencils, and she had all these great things for her science notebooks. And so she had her notes on the board, and then she just started lecturing and talking about the notes and calling on kids. And she was a wonderful teacher. And at the end of the class, I realized that not a lot of kids had taken notes. And so this, a couple of days of this, and then we did a notebook check. And hardly any of the kids had wrote down the notes. And she was just very stumped at why did this happen? I've got the colored pencils, I've got the outlines, this is so much fun. And I was like, well, can I try something? And she's like, sure. And it was one of those moments, I'm sure none of you have experienced this, where she didn't quite trust me. It's like, who's this lady in my classroom? Why is she here? And she's like, sure, okay, you can try something. And so I started using graphic organizers with the kids. And when I say a graphic organizer, it wasn't something I printed off online. It was just, if she had 4 topics that she was going to talk about, I drew 4 circles on a paper, showed it to the kids, they drew the same thing, and then we went on with our notes. I know one day we took paper and we folded it in 4 corners. Y'all remember foldables, right? Yes. It doesn't have to be something that's pre-planned. You can just look at what the material is and trying to figure out a sort of a picture for the kids to fill in the blanks. The next time we did the notebook check, almost every child had notes in their notebook from this. And they had colored, and it was wonderful. And so that built that relationship with me and that teacher. And it also showed the kids how to take notes, what the important things are. Okay, sticking with paper pencil for right now. The role of highlighters. So you've created this wonderful test, or your regular education teacher that you're supporting has created this wonderful test, and then you realize you didn't do a accommodated version. You didn't make it a shortened assignment, or you didn't keep it, to a word bank or some of the things. What you can do at that moment, and I have done this, is I highlight the questions I want that student or those students to complete. So they get this 50-question test and their eyes bug out of their heads and they're like, oh, I can't do this. And then I go by and I'm like, okay, I want you to do these parts. And I highlight those things. Now I'm gonna warn you, don't highlight just the odds and evens. Highlight the things that you want that student to show mastery on. Sometimes, especially it seems like in math, the first couple questions, 3 questions on a page are the same kind of format. And then you hit number 4 and it throws you a curve, it gives you a fraction or something, always, right? So going through that test and picking out the ones that student can show mastery on, very important. And then they don't feel that overwhelming urge to, oh my gosh, I have to finish the whole thing. You can give them the option if they would like to, but knowing that you've highlighted just those things that are important. And going to more than just odds and evens, think about what you want the student to show mastery on. So, and usually in a reading assignment, you have a couple of short answers in the very beginning. And so you don't want the students to do just the first 5 or the first 10 of an assignment. You want to pick through each category, through each section. Okay, let's get into technology. And I smile because at my school this morning, my phone was blowing up. And that's never good at 7:10 in the morning for your phone to be blowing up. Internet was down. And we had a reboot of all our computers, and we're doing some testing right now. So it was great. So I say technology with a smile on my face. But technology is wonderful. Oh my goodness. One of the first things I started using, because being 20 years into this, I've seen a lot of changes. So one of the first things I started using with technology for accommodations was a shared Google Doc. Let me tell you, that is a change maker right there. So my suggestions for those writing goals, and my goodness, it is so hard sometimes to do writing with students. So sharing a Google Doc with them is amazing. You can see what they're typing. They can see what you're typing. You can have a little conversation back and forth, and it's just you two. You can go, if you need to, and look in the history and find out who typed what. And so you can see when they worked on it and how much they worked on the assignment. This is also a time where you can step in and give them suggestions. But let's say I'm scheduled to be in the classroom during like a second block time, or I'm scheduled to be in there during their reading and writing time, but I can't be in there because I have a meeting or I have some sort of PD to go to. If the student shares the doc, you don't have to be in the same room. You can be in your meeting and you can give them a little, hello, I see what you're doing there. Why don't you add in this vocabulary word? Or give them a sentence starter. It's just really wonderful. We have a new app, a new system of looking at students' computers and monitoring what they're doing called Borderless Classroom, and it has a chat feature on there. And so many of my teachers are using that right now. So same kind of concept. If you have something like that, like a land school or something, you can chat with them and use it in a positive manner. The next part is something I ran into just recently. I had some students. I know we did the assignment together. We had our intervention class. I helped them write this paper, but they have a 0 in it in the grade book. The student, I was like, okay, what happened? We did this assignment together. And the student's like, I don't know. I'm like, did you turn it in? I don't know how. So going back to simply, how does a student know how to turn in the assignment? So I was like, okay, I need you to download it as a PDF. What? It's like, okay, let's talk about this. And so once we figured out the system for turning in our assignments, I mean, these kids were rocking and rolling. But you have to make sure that they know, again, how to turn in assignments. Even if it's just like writing the assignment out, name, everything, but where do I turn it in to the teacher if it's on a piece of paper? How do I do this? So when we're thinking about accommodations, sometimes it's just the accommodation is teaching them how to do the assignment and that how to turn it in, how to get it to the teacher. Okay, so I've touched on those individualized sentence starters. So when you're sharing that doc with a student, or let's say you're not sharing a doc, let's say they're kind of, they're taking a test, the teacher wants it to be their own words, and so they're typing it up and then they're gonna take a picture of it and submit it. Something you can do is once you get the prompt from the teacher is do an individualized sentence starter. So a lot of times teachers will say, this is a prompt and this is how to start. But it gives you information for the first paragraph, but what do you do with the rest? And so when you're thinking about individualized sentence starters is if you need to do your points, if the students need to address certain things within this writing prompt, doing a sentence starter for the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, however many paragraphs it needs to be. So it's not just at the top, because then usually what students do is just one complete run-on sentence for the whole essay, but breaking it up into parts for them. Suggestions in real time. So this is something that's hard to do, but it's so powerful. When I was in grad school and I would submit an assignment to a professor, when did I want it graded and turned into me? Immediately. I wanted her to look at it right then and give me that feedback so I could go in and learn or relearn whatever it is I needed to do. So as quickly as you can with assignments, giving them feedback. And this goes back to walking the room. So I'm walking the room and I'm looking at students' papers and I'm seeing that they're going down the right path, or maybe they're not going down the right path, but giving them that suggestion in real time so they can learn and then pivot from that thought if they're going off in the wrong way. So another really wonderful accommodation that you can just have students do immediately is speech to text. So turning on, it's just in Google, you can turn it on there. Some students, even we can have an accommodation to use their phone, to speak into their phone, to share their ideas and email it to themselves, whatever they feel comfortable with. But this is a bit of technology that is so powerful. I know several students who have these great ideas, but the processing from my great idea to writing it down on paper, I lose it somewhere in the process. So letting them have that accommodation to speak it and it pops up, but then this is a great grammar lesson. So then they go in and they put the periods and they put the exclamation points and they add in all those things that they need to actually make it a paper, an assignment to turn in. So these are my on-the-fly takeaways for today. So building a classroom culture of imperfection, that it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay. We want to make mistakes because that's how we learn. Allowing those students to feel that in your room. And when you're an inclusion teacher, sometimes it can be difficult when you come into a classroom and that culture has been established. So being there and being in that supportive role, using those Post-it notes, doing those little mini conferences will help build this culture. Mistakes equal learning. So sometimes when you're a teacher, it might feel like you are performing for your students to get their attention, to make them laugh, to keep them engaged. So along with that thought process, think about if you were doing a problem on the board and you made a mistake and maybe the students catch it. And so then you stop and you're like, okay, what did I do wrong here? Maybe you are doing the problem and you make a mistake and they didn't catch it. You stop and make a big deal out of it. Did no one catch what I just did? So with this, you have students that are like, oh, it's okay for me to make mistakes. My teacher makes mistakes. And I know it's silly, and it's probably something that was on a PBS special, in the 80s when I was watching those things. But it's so important because sometimes we look at our teachers and we're like, they never make a mistake. I can think of a math teacher right now. I don't think she's ever made a mistake at my school. But to create that culture of it's okay to make mistakes, we're all learning together, is very powerful for your building your classroom culture of imperfection. So when you're looking at your lesson, what is the purpose for your lesson? I know a big push right now in a lot of districts is your clear learning target. What is the purpose of my lesson? What does a student need to know by the end of this class period? So when you are doing those on-the-fly accommodations, you've got this, presentation you want the kids to create. What is the focus for that? What should the student really be learning from that and getting out of that? It's just not, check, we finished this. Check, we submitted it into the teacher now that we know how to turn in our assignments. But what is the focus for that lesson? And then what does the student need to learn from this task? What is it that's most important? You think about those holiday fun activities. Here, do this crossword puzzle. What is it that they really need to learn from that? And it might be that you want them to look for words and identify letters, and that's totally awesome. But you could use that in a different way too. Thinking about, did the student turn in their work? Why or why not? Thinking about homework. Does the student have a place at home to do their homework? Can you give them an accommodation of letting that student do the work in your classroom early in the morning before school starts, maybe while they're eating their breakfast? And then honoring your why. So I shared with you guys that me presenting is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, right? But I want to share these things. I want to share what I've learned, and I want to share little things that work for me in my classroom. And so I think about honoring my why. So my why is I have a younger sister who has Down syndrome. And as wonderful and cute and precious as she is so stubborn. And I know that when she was in school, that her teachers were probably frustrated with her at times. And I think about that moment and how I would want my sister to be treated in her classroom, knowing that her teacher's like on her last, like, okay, Erin, we're done with this, or whatever it is, and having that patience. So when I'm thinking about providing these accommodations for kids, doing these mini conferences, working with these teachers, providing, creating this classroom of imperfection, I think about my little sister and what I would have wanted for her, and it helps me put things into perspective. Honoring my why. Why am I doing this? So I know this is the SPED collaborative, and I know that we are here because most of us are probably special education teachers or work in that capacity somehow. But these are accommodations we can allow for all students in the classroom. There was not one that I said that wouldn't be allowed for your classroom setting with any student. Now, I will say a disclaimer statement, not for testing. Testing and district protocols, that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about in the classroom, in your learning process. This is something, all these things are things that we can use for all students in our classrooms. Okay, I think I went a little under time, but do I have any questions, comments, concerns, anything I can answer for you guys or clarify?
You mentioned earlier about purposeful breaks, especially during those long high school block periods. Can you give some more examples of what that might look like?
For purposeful break? Yes. So sometimes it could be even earlier on when the kids come in and they're coming in hot off like a pep rally or something, and they're just a little bit wild. Just taking a few minutes and turning on, especially if it's holiday time, turning on that Yule log on your TV and just turning on some music and say, hey guys, you've got 5 minutes to sit and talk with your friend. I always love to do levels. And I say this to kids a lot. You're at a level 10 right now, I need you about a 2. And so I'm like, okay guys, you're about out of 10. Let's bring it down to like level 5. And at the end, I want you at a level 2. And then let them go. And it might be a little loud, but you're gonna give them that chance to get that out of their system. I think another thing with purposeful breaks is when you're doing an assignment that's really challenging, I'm thinking about those, longer tests that they're taking, or if they're working on a presentation, it's they have like a rubric they will follow or something like that, letting the students individually know that when you get to a certain point, you can take a break. So when you get to number 5, you can stand up, you can stretch. At that point, you can go to the bathroom, those things. One thing that we've touched on recently at my school was, is when can I ask to go to the bathroom? I know it's such a small thing, but man, it can interrupt your whole world when you're teaching. And so letting the kids know your rules for your classroom. So when I'm talking, when I'm instructing, when I'm in the front of the room, when I'm performing for you, no bathrooms. You can hold it till I get done, because I probably won't talk for more than 15 minutes. And then they just naturally know that after you finish your instruction, then they can, take their bathroom breaks or whatever they might need to do. Oh, you're welcome. Oh.
I just wanted to say that I really like how you brought up specifically the accommodations, and just kind of piggybacking on that, we use those accommodations as we move on into adulthood as well. I'm dyslexic and I use voice to text for writing reports. So it's important, I think, for us to use them in the classroom and teach our students to understand that that's something that they'll be able to use, or teach them what the reason is that we're giving that accommodation. So
You're right. So at this point in my years of doing this, I've taught pre-K through 12th grade. And so I have this unique perspective where when we're in pre-K and we're doing circle time in the morning, how important that is going to be for when they get to be seniors. And I know that sounds silly, but you've got to set up those routines and what they're learning and those strategies. And so you're right, like these accommodations are something you'll be able to use throughout. Absolutely.
So these accommodations you have described today, do some of these work better for certain ages or certain subjects or certain abilities that students may have? Because I know you talked about verbal and you talked about action and paper, pencil, and technology. So are some of these better suited for some than others? So how do you make those decisions?
So you know your classroom the best, and you know your kids the best. And so, for example, when I was teaching pre-K, My little pre-Kers knew that during circle time, nothing else in the world existed, just our precious circle time. When you're thinking about high school, it can be different, but one thing you have to remember that they may act like adults and they may have attitude like adults, but they are children too, and that they need to be taught the routines and procedures and how to work in the school setting. And so when you're thinking about accommodations, you have to think about whether it's appropriate for that grade level for that age. But then again, remembering that you're creating a classroom culture, you're creating a school culture, and using those rules and those procedures is nothing new. My principal right now, he was an elementary school teacher and then became an elementary principal, and now he's in high school. And so him and I see eye to eye on things. We'll see things that are happening in the high school classroom, and I'm like, well, what's your procedure for getting markers from the back of your room? And the teacher's like, I tell the kids to get the markers. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. So you're meeting a stampede across your room to go get markers. Something as simple as saying, okay, you 3 people, you're gonna hand out my markers. So the concepts are the same, it's just how you present it. And I know that on here I put verbal, but you can also have prompts that you have written for kids too. So you can use that. I just didn't get into that. Oh, another question? Okay.
Do you ever lead kids or train kids to adopt these accommodations so that they initiate them and they learn to do them as when they know they need them?
Yes, I think that's a huge thing for kids to advocate for themselves. Absolutely. We think about the highlighting for a test. So let's say you're not there, and I had this happen. So you're not there in your inclusion classroom, and the regular education teacher just hands out the test. Some students that I had been working with raised their hand and are like, where's my highlights? I'm not supposed to do this whole test. So, creating that. In the high school setting, I was so proud. We had a student who's very, very shy, and somehow she didn't get in the right testing group, and she spoke up for herself and said, hey, I need to be in the group with extended time. I need about 10 more minutes to finish this test. And it was wonderful. So absolutely, teaching them to advocate for themselves, teaching them that you can ask for this accommodation is very, very powerful, and it makes them take control of their learning.
Do you recommend any of these, particularly for lower functioning or very nonverbal students, to, any of these accommodations you've talked about here that work particularly well with lower functioning students?
What do you mean by lower functioning?
Students that are less independent, that need more support, need more instruction, need more accommodations. Are any of these particularly good with those students?
So, even if a student is nonverbal, they can still advocate for themselves. If they're able to type, doing the Google Doc and having the student write in their questions there is very powerful. In high school setting, I was in a classroom where I got to observe this fantastic teacher, and he had red and green little paint samples, and if the student needed help, they didn't have to raise their hand, they didn't have to bring attention to themselves, they just put the red on top, and then they could ask whatever question. And as simple as it was for a 9th grade classroom, as simple as it was awesome. The teacher didn't have to go around the room asking, do you need help, do you need help? And even a student that's struggling, even a student that's, maybe not accessing all of those standards within that lesson could use that to signal to that teacher, I need help there. Making sure that the accommodations match what the student needs is very, very important also. And so if you're working with a general education teacher with a student and they're just like, I just don't know what to do, that would not be an accommodation on the fly necessarily. That would be something where you would need to go in and ask the teacher, what exactly are you seeing that they're struggling in? That's very important. You can't just assume. What do you see? And then helping that teacher model what can happen or how you can best support, and then looking at the data. Are they able to achieve whatever goal that is in the end with that accommodation?
And just for a second, say I love that accommodation. I think that they can be so powerful no matter what grade band that you're working with. And I think that's often underutilized in classrooms. And people say, well, that's babyish, or we don't do cards and things like that here in our classroom. But I think it is powerful in a way that when you have, I add a yellow card into it. So red is I can't go on without you. Yellow is I can get started, but I can't go far. Or I'm patient enough to wait on you. And green is like I'm all good. We're rocking and rolling. And so knowing that you can look around any classroom, no matter what activity you have, no matter what level of learner that you have, and you can immediately see who needs your help right away. And as you're getting one group started and one group going, then you can manage your own time and the students' needs through that as well. So like if you've got kids who are using speech to text, but they can't get logged in because the internet is down, like what's happening this morning, then you have a chance to, address those things as you need to and get those learners moving so that you've not wasted all their time, and they're probably getting extra time anyways, or you have modified curriculum in your room, and so you need help to get those folks started. So it's a nice way to really, I think, differentiate any classroom, regardless of what you're teaching and who your students are. It's a strategy that I like to use a lot. So I'm glad to hear that today.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And I wanted to say this, I was very specific when I said these are accommodations you can use. I didn't address anything that was a modification here today, because that's another whole area for another day. These are just accommodations. This is something we can use with all students. With the red card, the green card, the yellow card. I love the yellow. That's a great idea. Claim it, girl. Just claim it. And another thing that when you're looking at what are the students learning, how do we know that they know what they're doing, what are we going to do when they don't, how do we keep track of that? That's an added layer to that. And so I'm a big believer in clipboards. I actually have a clipboard with me here today. And there's something powerful about the teacher walking around the room and monitoring whether the kids are understanding the assignment. And when you do have those red cards, green cards, going up to the student and working through that with them, and then seeing that they have it, and then they can see you say check or highlight or whatever you're doing to keep track of that, and they're like, yes, I got it, I'm good. So that can be a very powerful thing too that you can do. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that suggestion from the audience. And I'd like to open the audience to the floor to ask, does anyone else have ideas like that are good accommodations on the fly? And I'd like Dr. Birch to respond, to comment. So any other ideas like that you've used?
I've been trying to sit on this question. It's sharing, but it was something I had difficulty with as a middle school special ed inclusion teacher. During writing assignments, allowing students to use text to speech and getting the buy-in from the teachers. What's your experience with that, with being able to differentiate and getting the same product through a different process? And then also, I was fortunate to have a space, a converted teacher workroom, across from our general ed setting, so the students who wanted to take that option, and we gave that option to everybody in the class. It wasn't just an IEP accommodation. They were able to come out of the class because it could be a little noisy and distracting for others. So what's your experience with teacher buy-in, and then how do you manage that accommodation within the class setting?
Definitely talking to the teacher about it before you're actually in the moment, so you can answer any questions they have about that. And letting them know that, that the student will be going back in to read what they've written through text to speech to text, and making those corrections as needed. As far as going to a separate room, I know, because I was a special education teacher, and then I did a little bit as just a general education teacher, and I didn't like my students leave my room because I wanted to see what they were doing. Not that I didn't trust my support there, but I wanted to see so I could keep track. And so sometimes I would let that student just sit out in the hallway right outside my door. In Florida, we had breezeways, and here in Tennessee, we have hallways. So I let them sit out in the breezeways when I was in Florida doing this. And It was also a great little break for the student if there was a lot going on in the room, to just, to step outside, record what they needed to, and come back in. It shouldn't be something that takes up a whole class period too. It should be something where they put their story, whatever they want to say, into the document, and then they come on back into the classroom. So it's not like they're going to go out there and be gone 45 minutes or something. So I think having a time with that, explaining it to the teacher ahead of time, possibly showing them on the IEP, the student needs this and this is why, and then moving forward with that. And then readdressing that too. So sometimes as special education teachers, we will say, here's your IEP at a glance. Talk to you later. It's like, okay, now we're gonna do a follow-up. So we did this accommodation, the kids were able to use their speech to text, and they did a wonderful job. How can we improve it for next time? What are some things that we could do differently? And letting that general education teacher be part of that conversation. And those don't have to be like formal conversations either. It can be you're sitting at lunch with them, or you're walking out to their car with them. It doesn't have to be a big formal setting to just have a quick conversation about, hey, did that work? Oh, it didn't work. Well, let's try this. Okay, high five. See you tomorrow. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question from online. So we're talking about accommodations on the fly. And so the question is, do you have any suggestions for helping improve executive functioning with accommodations on the fly?
Specifically, what kind
Executive
of executive functioning?
Yes.
Like, can you elaborate on that?
My understanding would be, and I welcome the person who entered this question to add some comments there, but my understanding, for example, when you receive a lot of information and you are trying to sort or prioritize, I welcome any other comments from the audience on how to define executive functioning, but that's my understanding of executive functioning. Comments from the audience on that?
So my thought process, and I might be off, I need some more clarification on that, would be, I'm in the front of the room as a teacher. Sorry, I just thought it's a really funny story. So I was doing so presenting to adults is very different than presenting to your students in your classroom, right? Very different. And one of my first PDs I did as an instructional coach was about teachers. One of the things I presented on was teachers giving too many directions at the beginning of the classroom, like beginning of assignment. And so I, in front of my teachers, was like, okay, so we're gonna read this article, you're gonna write 3 things that you think is important, then you're gonna share with your group, and then we're gonna come back together. And there was a teacher in the back that I know wasn't paying attention, and I was like, okay, I won't say his name, I'll just say Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, what did I just say? And Mr. Smith was like, Birch, I have no idea. And I'm like, okay, so let's stop and think about our kids in the classroom. So what could I have done better to help you know what's happening right now? And so maybe breaking it down. Okay, we're gonna read this article. Get the article out, go ahead. When you see the students are about getting done, you ask, if you need 1 more minute, 30 seconds, student raises their hand, give them that time, you get to the end, then say, hey, now I want you to write 3 things, most important things from that article. And then give them time to process that. You can also, I've seen my teachers, I've got some great teachers, that in a situation like that, they're like, oh my gosh, I forgot. So they'll run up and they'll do a quick PowerPoint slide with the directions on it. Or you can plan that ahead of time, but sometimes it has to be on the fly. So you have those so that the kids can hear it, and then they can see it, and then refer back to it. Because you do have those students also that, I heard what you said, what was it again? And so then they can refer back to it on the board. And this also can be helpful with the ask 3 and then me, so they can ask their partner, what was this again? What are we supposed to be doing? Maybe that answered some of that question. I see some nods. Okay.
Dr. Birch, thank you for this presentation today. And we do so much planning, but we do so much on the fly. We do it every day, and we have to be intuitive about it, right? And so the more we do it and the more ideas we hear, we can incorporate it, but to be intuitive to know what to use, when to use it, and with whom to use it. So this was very helpful, very practical, and so we hope that the audience will take it right back to the classroom. Thank you for presenting today.
Thank you.